The smell of grilled steak and smoked ribs filled the warm summer air as James Parker flipped a juicy burger on his backyard grill. His small but lively neighborhood thrived on weekend barbecues, kids running around, laughter echoing, and the scent of sizzling meat drifting down the block. It was tradition. It was freedom. And it was his favorite part of living in this community. That was until she arrived. Nancy Weller, self-appointed president of the newly formed Homeowners Association, marched down the sidewalk with her ever-present clipboard and a scowl sharp enough to cut through steel. James had barely placed a slice of cheddar on his burger when she stopped at his fence, arms crossed. "Mr. Parker," she said, her tone dripping with superiority, "did you not receive the memo?" James wiped his hands on his apron and raised an eyebrow. "What memo?" Nancy huffed. "As of this week, the HOA has officially banned all outdoor grilling. The smoke is a nuisance, the smell lingers, and frankly, it's unsanitary, not to mention a fire hazard." James blinked. "You're joking, right?" "Not in the slightest," she said, holding up a stack of papers. "All homeowners must comply immediately. Any violations will result in fines." James glanced at his grill, the perfectly seared burger still sizzling. "Yeah, no, that's ridiculous." Nancy's face turned an angry shade of red. "Excuse me." "I said it's ridiculous," James repeated. "This is our neighborhood. We've been grilling here for years. Nobody ever complained." "Well, I am complaining, and so is the HOA. If you don't shut that thing off immediately, I'll have to issue a formal violation." James smirked and picked up his spatula. "Go ahead, but first let me finish my burger." Nancy gasped as he took an exaggerated bite. "This isn't over, Mr. Parker," she snapped, stomping away. James chewed thoughtfully, watching her disappear down the street. Oh, this was going to be fun. James barely had time to enjoy the last bite of his burger before his phone buzzed. A message popped up in the neighborhood group chat. "Nancy Weller. Effective immediately, all outdoor grilling is banned per HOA Regulation 14B. Any violations will result in a $200 fine. Let's keep our community clean and smoke-free." Smiling face with smiling eyes. The reaction was instant. "Mike Reynolds, you've got to be kidding me." "Sarah Gomez, this is outrageous. My family has Sunday barbecues every week." "Tom Henderson, over my dead body, fire up the grills, people." James chuckled, but he wasn't laughing when he found a bright yellow violation notice taped to his front door. Official notice. "You have been found in violation of HOA Regulation 14B. A fine of $200 has been issued. Failure to comply may result in further action." James crumpled the paper in his fist. This wasn't just about barbecues, this was about control. Nancy had been trying to sink her claws into the neighborhood since she moved in, slapping people with fines for everything from unapproved garden gnomes to excessive Halloween decorations. But this was war. Stepping onto his porch, he saw his neighbor Mike storming up the walkway, waving his own violation notice. "She's lost her damn mind," he fumed. "We need to do something." "Oh, we will," James said, a slow grin spreading across his face. "But first we need a plan." Mike folded his arms. "What are you thinking?" James glanced down the street, where more neighbors were stepping out of their houses, notices in hand, all of them muttering in frustration. "I'm thinking," James said, "that if she wants to ban barbecues, we should show her just how much this neighborhood loves them." By the next morning, the entire neighborhood was buzzing. The HOA's ridiculous grilling ban had struck a nerve, and James wasn't the only one ready to fight back. Mike had already gone door to door, rallying support. Sarah had started a petition. Even old Mrs. Peterson, who usually kept to herself, had waddled down her driveway to declare, "That woman can pry my ribs from my cold, saucy fingers." But it wasn't enough to complain. James wanted to make a statement. Nancy, of course, was loving the chaos. She strutted around the cul-de-sac like a queen surveying her kingdom, clutching her clipboard and handing out more violation notices. By noon, she had fined at least 10 families. James leaned on his porch railing, watching her with mild amusement. She actually thought she was winning. That's when Mike jogged up, grinning like a kid with a secret. "We got everyone on board," he said. "We're doing it." James's smile widened. "Good, let's give her a show she'll never forget." Over the next few days, the preparations began. People whispered in hushed tones over fences, exchanged knowing glances in driveways, and stocked up on supplies like they were preparing for the barbecue Olympics. The tension in the air was thick, anticipation mixed with the sweet smell of rebellion. And then on Saturday afternoon, it happened. At exactly 3 p.m., one by one, grills fired up. Smoke curled into the sky like battle signals. The aroma of ribs, burgers, brisket, and hot dogs spread through the streets. Laughter and chatter filled the air. Families set up picnic tables, speakers blasted music, and kids ran around with plates piled high with food. It was the biggest cookout the neighborhood had ever seen. And standing in the middle of it all, looking like she was about to have an aneurysm, was Nancy Weller. Nancy stood frozen on the sidewalk, her face contorted in horror as she took in the scene. Every single house, every single one, had a grill going. Smoke curled into the air from backyards, driveways, even the front lawns. The sounds of sizzling meat and cheerful chatter filled the neighborhood. Her hand trembled as she yanked out her phone. "This is outrageous," she screeched, snapping pictures and furiously typing. James, flipping a rack of ribs, strolled up to her, tongs in hand. "Something wrong, Nancy?" he asked, the picture of innocence. "This is a blatant violation of HOA rules," she barked, waving her clipboard. "I will fine every one of you." James smirked. "Go ahead, we've all agreed to split the fines." Nancy's mouth fell open. "W what?" Mike, walking up with a plate of pulled pork, nodded. "Yeah, turns out $200 isn't so bad when you divide it by 50 households." Sarah joined in, grinning. "And since you're the only one against this, that makes it, what, $4 each, totally worth it." Nancy's face turned the color of an overcooked lobster. "You cannot just—" A sudden whoosh cut her off. She turned, eyes wide, as Tom Henderson cranked up his industrial smoker, sending a thick plume of delicious-smelling smoke directly in her direction. She coughed, waving her hands frantically. "This is harassment." James crossed his arms, feigning concern. "Oh no, Nancy, you okay? Maybe you should sit down. We wouldn't want you to get overwhelmed." Nancy's eye twitched. "This is not over," she seethed, jabbing a finger at James. "You're all going to regret this." She spun on her heel and stormed off, smoke trailing behind her like an angry cartoon character. James chuckled, turning back to his grill. "Oh, I really doubt that." By Monday morning, the entire neighborhood was still buzzing from the Great Barbecue Rebellion. People swapped leftovers, laughed about Nancy's meltdown, and proudly displayed their smoke-stained HOA violation notices like badges of honor. But James knew Nancy wasn't done. Sure enough, just after noon, an email blasted through the neighborhood. Subject: immediate action required, HOA enforcement. Residents: due to widespread defiance of HOA Regulation 14B, we have escalated the matter to county authorities. Fire department officials will be making rounds this weekend to enforce safety compliance. Any further violations will result in serious legal action. Sincerely, Nancy Weller, HOA President. James read the email twice before laughing out loud. She actually thinks this is going to scare us. Mike, who had just arrived with a fresh cup of coffee, rolled his eyes. "Yeah, right. She called the fire department over some barbecues. They have real emergencies to deal with." "She's desperate," James said. "And if she wants to play dirty, it's time we take this up a notch." Mike grinned. "What are you thinking?" James leaned in, his voice low and mischievous. "She wants the fire department involved? Fine, let's make sure they get the full experience." By the next morning, plans were in motion. The neighbors worked together, each playing their part. Calls were made, supplies were gathered, and invitations were sent out. And when the weekend arrived, everything was perfectly in place. Just as Nancy had threatened, a fire department truck slowly rolled through the neighborhood around noon. A few firefighters, looking mildly confused, stepped out, clearly expecting to deal with some major fire code violations. Instead, they walked straight into the most elaborate, well-organized barbecue festival they had ever seen. Nancy stood at the end of the street, arms crossed, watching with smug satisfaction as the fire department truck pulled up. "Finally," she muttered. "Now they'll see just how reckless these people are." But as the firefighters stepped out, their expressions shifted from confusion to pure delight. Rows of tables were lined with platters of brisket, ribs, burgers, and smoked sausages. Colorful banners reading "Welcome Local HEROES" stretched across driveways. Kids ran around with tiny firefighter hats, while smiling neighbors handed out plates piled high with food. James, standing by his massive smoker, waved cheerfully. "Welcome, guys. Hope you brought an appetite." One of the firefighters chuckled. We were told there was a fire hazard." Mike, flipping a set of burgers, shook his head. "No hazards here, just perfectly safe, expertly handled barbecuing." Sarah stepped up with a clipboard, her own clipboard, filled with printed copies of county fire codes. "In fact, every single grill and smoker here has been checked for safety. We even followed extra precautions per fire department recommendations. Extinguishers, safe distances, proper fuel usage, you name it." Another firefighter, clearly amused, nodded. "Yeah, looks like you guys are doing everything right." He turned to his crew. "Might as well enjoy some lunch while we're here." Nancy's jaw nearly hit the pavement. "What, you can't support this?" she shrieked. "This is an outrage. These people are breaking HOA rules." One of the firefighters raised an eyebrow. "Ma'am, HOA rules aren't fire laws, and from what I'm seeing, there's no violation here." James stepped forward, barely concealing his grin. "But we do appreciate you coming out. In fact," he gestured toward the massive spread, "we made extra just for you guys." The firefighters exchanged glances, shrugged, and grabbed plates. Within minutes, they were happily chowing down, complimenting the neighborhood's grilling skills. Nancy, meanwhile, was turning an alarming shade of purple. "This is not how this was supposed to go," she sputtered. James took a slow, satisfied bite of his brisket. "Well, Nancy, maybe next time you'll learn not to mess with a neighborhood built on barbecue." Nancy stood there, fists clenched, watching as the very people she had called for backup happily devoured smoked brisket and ribs. Her face twitched as a firefighter let out a satisfied sigh and said, "Damn, this might be the best pulled pork I've ever had." "This is unacceptable," she shrieked, stomping her foot like a toddler denied a toy. "You're supposed to be shutting this down, not stuffing your faces." One of the firefighters, still chewing, glanced at her. "Ma'am, there's nothing illegal happening here. These folks are grilling safely, and frankly, this is some top-tier barbecue." He wiped his mouth. "You called us out here for nothing." Nancy's face contorted in rage. But the smoke, the smell, the rules." James, wiping his hands on his apron, smirked. "Oh, don't worry, Nancy. We've taken the HOA's concerns very seriously." Mike nodded, barely holding back laughter. "Yep. We even made sure to position the grills so that the wind carries the delicious smell right toward your house." Nancy's eyes widened in horror. "You what?" Just then, a gust of wind carried a thick wave of mouth-watering smoke straight to her front porch. She let out a strangled noise, coughing dramatically as if she had just inhaled toxic fumes. Tom, enjoying a plate of ribs, grinned. You smell that? Smells like freedom." Nancy let out a frustrated screech, turned on her heel, and stormed back toward her house. But just as she reached her front door, she froze. Because sitting on her welcome mat was a gigantic gift basket, packed with homemade barbecue sauce, smoked meats, and a handwritten card that read, "To our dear HOA president, may you finally learn to appreciate the joy of barbecue. With love, your smoke-filled neighbors." The entire neighborhood erupted in laughter as Nancy let out one final, furious scream and slammed her door so hard a garden gnome toppled over. James took a slow sip of his lemonade, watching the scene with deep satisfaction. "Well," he said, I think she finally got the message. For the next few days, Nancy was nowhere to be seen. Her curtains remained tightly shut, her car stayed in the driveway, and not a single self-righteous email was sent to the HOA group. It was almost too good to be true. James, enjoying the peace, leaned back in his lawn chair, savoring a plate of leftover ribs. "You think she finally gave up?" he asked Mike, who was lounging next to him. Mike chuckled. "Either that, or she's inside plotting her next ridiculous rule." But as the weekend approached, something shocking happened. Nancy finally emerged. But she wasn't stomping around with her clipboard or handing out fines. No, she was setting up a grill. The neighborhood watched in stunned silence as she clumsily arranged charcoal, flipping through a barbecue instruction manual like a confused student before a big test. James and Sarah exchanged glances. "No way," she whispered. Then, as if sensing the eyes on her, Nancy straightened up and cleared her throat. I suppose I may have been a bit hasty in my decision," she admitted begrudgingly. "Perhaps barbecues aren't the worst thing in the world." James smirked. "Are you saying we won?" Nancy's face twitched, but after a long, suffering sigh, she muttered, "Yes, you won." The street erupted in cheers. Tom even ran over with a plate of ribs. "Come on, Nancy," he said, grinning. "Time to see what you've been missing out on." She hesitated, then, reluctantly, took a bite. Silence. Then, with a slow, almost pained nod, she admitted, "Okay, that's actually pretty good." James leaned in. "Welcome to the dark side." And just like that, the HOA barbecue ban was officially dead. The neighborhood's cookouts continued, stronger than ever, and Nancy, while still uptight, never dared to challenge them again. As the sun set, smoke curling lazily into the sky, James raised his drink. "To barbecue," he said, "and to never letting anyone take it away from us again." The street echoed with cheers, laughter, and the sound of sizzling meat. Peace and delicious food had been restored.